Thank you. I'm going to read one of the stories out of Monkeys. The way I had conceived of the book when I wrote it was as separate stories that sort of belonged together. So the idea was that each chapter could stand on its own as just a story in and of itself. So even if you don't know the book, it should be able to just be a little story and sort of make sense. This is in the middle of the book. There are a number of there are a lot of Vincent children. Sophie and Caitlin, who are the two oldest girls, are the ones who sort of figure most prominently in this one. Wildflowers. "Maybe we should help her," said Sophie, sitting on the window seat of the front room. The open windows let in the luffing of sails and the clanging of halyards, but louder than that were dishes making a clatter in the kitchen. "She hasn't asked," said Caitlin with a smile. Their feet, barely touching, did not move. Out in the harbor, sailboats were circling one another, tacking this way and that, positioning themselves before the starting gun. Kids in rowboats shot jackknife sprays with their oars, while other kids watched from railings above. Mum passed by the living room and out the door. Sophie and Caitlin heard her squeal in the wind and rolled their eyes. She reappeared on the dock carrying a plate of brownies in one hand and a vase of flowers in the other. Her dress fluttered about her, the vase bent back like a torch. It was part of it for the ladies giving the Saturday race teas to bring flowers, usually from their own gardens, careful arrangements of dahlias and zinnias and sweet William. Mum had brought wildflowers, loose strife and buttercups and Queen Anne's lace. There was no space for a garden at the Vincents', with the dock in front and Main Street just up the steps. The vegetable garden was in another place entirely, so Mum gathered flowers up island. She found fields everywhere shimmering down to the sea, flowers scattered and random, not boxed inside walls. On her bedside table she kept a small vase, always fresh. "She's feeling her oats," said Sophie, watching Mum head for the clubhouse at the end of the dock. Inside the mahogany darkness, other bright dresses were crossing back and forth. "She thinks she needs to say hello to everyone in sight," Caitlin said. Upstairs along the hall, a series of doors slammed in the draft, one after another. "Guess who must be racing today," said Sophie. Caitlin, studying the scene, nodded. The crowd that showed up 2 hours later at the clubhouse was not large, but it was dense. Everyone clustered together. They'd known each other a long time. Beneath the pyramid of yachting flags were familiar tennis hats and faded salmon shorts, warped topsiders and yellowing socks. Short lime green skirts, fashionable anywhere else in 1970, were here on North Eden nothing new. They were what the ladies wore and always had worn, playing golf. Apart from the crowd, slumped against the tackle shed were the wayward teenagers in torn blue jeans and Indian prints. Caitlin and Sophie, among them, snuck drags from a furtive cigarette. Mum was sitting near the clubhouse doorway in front of a silver samovar, handing cups of tea upward with napkins pressed beneath. Chickie, the youngest Vincent, was waiting near her elbow for a cookie. According to their grandmother, Chickie looked exactly like Dad. She had said the same thing about each baby, as Mum had had them, 7 of them, one right after another. Caitlin and Sophie, the first babies, had been dressed in blue for the first years of their lives, in honor of the Blessed Virgin. Mum had been taught by nuns. After her 7th baby, she stopped listening to the Pope. She was 39 years old now. Her last baby, Chickie, was 6. And for the first time since marrying Dad, she had no little fists clutching at her hem, the way they would in department stores. "Hold on," she'd say, before weaving off through crowded aisles. "Just one," she whispered to Chicky. He snuck a cookie from the china plate. Around the corner, kids were lined up for ice cream, being scooped out of a cardboard tub by freckled Amy Haffenreffer, who preferred the company of children. Out on the thoroughfare by the spindle, the last of the sailboats were tacking into the finish line, each at a different angle, all at a heel. Caitlin nudged Sophie. Mom was pouring a cup of tea. The man next to her had a grayish-white spot on the back of his dark head, and Mum's eyes were lit with a brightness. When her sister Grace visited, sitting on the porch in her smart wool dresses and silk kerchiefs and black sunglasses, telling New York stories, Mum would get that look, giggling now and then in an odd, excited way. The first time the girls had seen it had been years ago, in the lamplight, when they'd spent the night in the cabin on Boxed Island. Mum came flying out of the cricket darkness, her nightgown luminous, a fiery look in her eye. She was panting. On her way to the outhouse, she'd seen a fox, a silver fox. "It streaked across my path," she said. Her hands trembled and toyed with the ruffle at her neck. Her pupils were lit in bright points from the oil lamp. "No such thing," said Dad, thumping at a flimsy mattress. Mum stood there transfixed. She turned to her babies, all 6 of them in diminishing sizes, rolled up in flannel sleeping bags. "As silver as the silver Orient," she said. It was from a story they all knew, one Mum had read to them, about the train that took off from its tracks and flew over the Alps. Later, when the cabin was dark, Caitlin and Sophie heard Mum and Dad mumbling across the room. "Oh, they'll forget about it by tomorrow," Mum said. But they didn't. It was one of those things they remembered and mentioned now and then, about that time the silver fox streaked across Mum's path, and how her eyes were lit, not with fright, and how Dad said there was no such thing. When Mum handed the man a cup of tea, the look was there, thrilled. Wilbur Kittredge had his collar turned up against his tanned skin. He was the head of a large international company. He made bombs. The Kittredge estate was set high on a bluff of North Eden. The main house had a long porch that overlooked the bay where humped islands scattered off into tiny dots. The estate had stables, an electric fence, and guest cottages, and a walled-in garden where stone satyrs huddled, ears pointed, fingers secretly at their lips. They had exotic animals, antelopes, and a snow leopard and crocodiles and special guests. A Balinese fire dancer had performed under the moon. An American Indian had constructed an authentic teepee. The topiary garden was designed by an Italian monk to depict a tennis match. A man sculpted in privet served a green ball to a sculpted woman in a flared privet skirt crouched at a slender privet hedge. Each year the Kittredges had a clam bake, invited the whole island, all the summer people, that is, and certain islanders who knew who they were. But the main attraction was the carriages. Wilbur Kittredge had over 40 antique carriages lined up in a special barn. There were scenes painted on the shiny doors, polished brass railings, leather seats and velvet seats and fringed surreys with wicker sides. When Dad was home in Marshport during the week, Mum went on rides. Wilbur Kittredge was a special friend of Mum's. Over the years, he'd sent her presents, strange items from strange lands. One package held an odd wreath of shellacked flowers, which Mum hung over the mitten basket. Caitlin and Sophie knew that if Dad had given her something like that, it would have gone straight to the cellar. Some things just weren't Mum's taste. When his first son Gus was born, after 3 girls, Dad brought Mum gladiolas. To make it worse, they were yellow. His presents made Mum bite her lip. There was a whole world of things, not me, or a little off. Dad learned to leave the sales slip in the box. The teenagers were discussing various figures in the crowd. "Old Will Kittredge is looking pretty dapper," said Westy Granger sullenly. "Is your father up?" asked Tricia Holt, who had painted a rose on her cheek. Everyone on the island minded each other's business. You always knew who was up or not. Everyone knew that Wilbur Kittredge's wife was at a spa in California. "He got up yesterday," Sophie said. "He's probably at the garden." The vegetable garden was in the middle of the island on a bit of land their grandfather had bought long ago. The garden was one of Dad's projects. He'd grown the plants from seed in soil cubes that sat on a green plastic tray in the laundry room. He studied each seed as if it were a jewel, releasing it and brushing the dirt over with his baby finger. Each night he brought back something for supper: small clubs of zucchini, ripe tomatoes, string beans with their raw fiberglass skin, and carrots luminous under creases of dirt. Dad had other projects. For after dinner he liked to carve small birds. He was rebuilding the back walkway. There were mooring lines to be spliced onto buoys. When they were little, Dad built a lot of things: a bicycle hutch, a playhouse down in the woods, a treehouse with 3 separate platforms. Whenever a new baby came home, he built something for it. He constructed a bassinet with a step around it so the girls could stand and watch while Mum gave the baby a bath. They watched her fold the diapers fiercely, her eyes with an intent glare, clenching pins in her teeth, pins with plastic tulips on them. To Caitlin and Sophie it seemed there was always a new baby. When it came home from the hospital, Caitlin and Sophie dressed up as Indians and made cards for Mum. The bundle got picked up and put down, and when it was left in its carriage, it lifted its head to stare at the back. Caitlin and Sophie looked into the black carriage at the baby's head, bobbing around like a buoy, staring at nothing. It could stare at nothing for hours. It was in the baby carriage that Frances died. She was the 5th baby. Only Caitlin and Sophie could remember it, being 6 and 5. It was in the afternoon. Mum came home with shopping bags, crinkling, wearing her Boston suit and with her hair in a puff from the hairdresser's. Delilah and Gus were there. Everyone always came running into the hall when Mum came home. She picked baby Frances out of the carriage where it was parked on the porch. Mum went tucking at the baby's throat. Suddenly she was in a hurry, pulling the baby tight to her, touching the baby's face. The kids all look. Mum spat out, "Get down in the playroom," more mean than she'd ever yelled before. They weren't important anymore at all. Mum ran into the TV room, and Caitlin saw her put her mouth on top of baby Frances's mouth, trying to dial the phone at the same time. Then she slammed it down and went tearing out the hall and down the steps and onto the driveway toward the Birches. The next day and for a while after, the driveway was filled with cars and the house with people. Caitlin and Sophie found ashtrays next to their toothbrushes in the bathroom and teacups on the piano bench. Baby Frances, they were told, was now in heaven, and the grown-ups looked down at them as if they didn't understand. There were flowers everywhere, baskets on tables, pots on the floor, carefully shaped pyramids, and clipped round globes. One day, Sophie saw Mum sitting alone in the living room, where no one ever was, on the arm of a chair in a slouch. Her thumb moved slowly up and down her elbow, smoothing it over. Downstairs in the playroom, Caitlin said it was because Mum still missed baby Frances. Sophie said she did too. "Well," Delilah said, "I'm not going to die." "You have to," Caitlin said. "Everyone in the world has to." "Not me," Delilah said, pressing her eyelashes down. "I'm going to be the first one in the world not to." "But that's impossible, Delilah." "Just wait." They were all drawing pictures of the family, cards to give to Mum and Dad. You lined everyone up according to age. In the sky they put an angel with a halo and wings and black hair for baby Frances. The next baby, Sherman, came less than a year after. He was a bad crier. He had a long, high screech that would suddenly stop as if a switch had been thrown. After a long silence, he'd launch again into even higher wails, gasps to make up for the time spent not breathing. Among the tea drinkers on the wharf was a trio of strangers to North Eden. 2 swarthy men and a statuesque blonde woman near the sail closet. They looked European. "Kittredge house guests," said Westy Granger. "I bet they're folk singers," said Tricia Holt. "They look like Peter, Paul, and Mary." "More like a Swedish movie star," said Westy's friend with the long hair. "Quite a T-shirt on her." "The mystery woman, perhaps," said Westy. The other night they were careening home from a moonless party at Blind Men's Beach when they came upon a dark carriage clip-clopping along the middle road. Red lamps were swinging from points up front, and there were 2 silhouettes under the fringed awning. The car slowed down and pulled to the side, and everyone looked. Next to Mr. Kittredge was a woman with a hat on. Caitlin dug her elbow into Sophie's rib. A thin fly whip passed across the rosy lights, waving them on. Westy screeched forward and began to sing the chorus of an anti-war song, and everyone joined in. The fact that Mr. Kittredge made bombs did not, according to Mum, mean that he was bad. She recognized the bad guys. She threw her shoe at Nixon when he was on TV. She distributed leaflets after the bombing of Cambodia and gave cocktail parties with Patricia Meyer, the only other Democrat in Marshport, to raise money for their candidates. Years before, on a tour of the Capitol, they visited their senator, and afterward Mum brought Caitlin and Sophie to visit Mr. Kittredge. Mum liked to look at other people's houses. While she was touring the greenhouse and the collection rooms and the new addition, Caitlin and Sophie swam in the Kittredges' slate pool without anyone watching, something they'd never done before. None of the other Kittredges were there, but they never were. The afternoon air was hushed, with only heat bugs going, and when it started to rain, the girls slipped into the pool house. It had an automatic ice maker and ceramic elephants under glass tabletops, cushions trimmed in green bamboo patterns, and a pair of tusks taller than the girls guarding the doorway. Silver frames showed the blonde Kittredge daughters in bathing suits, waist-deep in turquoise water, glinting gold jewelry. When Mum and Mr. Kittredge got back, he lifted a trap door and led them down cement steps into a cement room, the bomb shelter. In the corner were boxes of dried foods stacked up like bricks. Of all the things she saw, Mum said, the glass orchids were her favorite. Mum always told the girls her favorite things. Wilbur Kittredge poked his head out of the clubhouse door and waved to the 2 men and the blonde woman. They appeared amused with their surroundings, observing the scene with an air of irony. Wilbur Kittredge seemed to share their private joke and greeted them warmly when they joined him. Mum turned in her seat to be introduced, her shoulders stiff, her smile polite, and her eyes lightning quick, taking it all in. Before dinner each evening, Caitlin practiced her driving. She and Mum took the loop by the vegetable garden with the windows rolled down. Lumbering down the rutted road, the station wagon would scrape its fender on the deep holes, making Mum wince. This evening after the race tea, when Caitlin looked over, Mum's face was pensive. A few strands of hair were caught in the side of her mouth, but she didn't brush them away. They drove by the pond, choked with lily pads and high-blown weeds, and past the fence Dad had made. He'd also built a hitching post at the parking place, and when they rounded the corner, they found it occupied. Tied up to it was a horse and carriage. "Oh," said Mum, sitting forward. The glint in her eye showed that she knew the carriage, and well. It was one of the smaller carriages, with a black hood curving over a double seat, no windows. The horse's long face was close to the car, its blinders out like absurd shutters, staring at them. Further back in the gray shade of the bonnet, they could see the back of Wilbur Kittredge's head and the silvery spot on it. Behind him, with a different glow, was a white T-shirt arching upward. "Turn around," Mum said. Caitlin shifted into neutral, and the engine roared. "Back up." Mum was looking everywhere but forward. The car went stuttering backwards in jerks. Once around the corner they stopped. and switched places, and Mum drove home. The wind dies down at that time of day, and the bay past Clam Cove, its mud flat shiny, was pearly and still, a silk tablecloth with sailboats sitting on top, motionless. "I didn't think we should get any nearer," said Mum after a while. "Those are especially spirited horses. They spook." The crease in her forehead hinted at deeper knowledge. Whatever it was, she kept it to herself. Not long after, the island fell under the spell of a heat wave that wouldn't let up. It lasted for the rest of the summer. A limpid air hung over the glassy thoroughfare, which remained undulating and languid and pale blue. Screams and splashes could be heard day and night as kids ran drumming off the floats. Over the Labor Day weekend was the Kittredges' annual clam bake, but the Vincents didn't go. Dad had played too long on the golf course that day and was out with heat stroke. He shut himself in his room, pulled the shades down, and lay in the dark. Mum, who sometimes went to parties without him, this year did not feel up to it, and went to bed early, too. At the end of the summer, the Vincents returned to Marshport, and once again Wilbur Kittredge's postcards appeared on the hall table, greetings from distant lands like Peru or Zanzibar or the Seychelles Islands, cheerful notes dashed off in a loose, large hand, unsigned. The following spring, after her 40th birthday, Rosie Vincent gave birth for the 8th time. It was a girl, Miranda Rose. Everyone was excited. There hadn't been a baby in the house for years. Mum sat up in bed in her pretty nightgown, the flowers behind her bordered in fleur-de-lis, holding her new treasure. Everyone hovered around, knocking against the dust ruffle, lying diagonally at her feet. Mum gazed into the infant eyes, seeing their strange clarity. She touched the tiny nose. She uncurled the fiddlehead fists and showed them to everyone lolling around. "You see," she said, "her father's hands exactly." Then came the feeding. They watched her unbutton the nightgown and feel inside for the bosom. After fixing it to the baby mouth and satisfied with it, she looked up. Caitlin and Sophie saw it, that wild look, only this time there was something added. It was aimed at them, and it said, "There is nothing in the world compares with this." The eye was fierce, the baby stayed fast. There is nothing so thrilling as this. Nothing.